Welcome to The Explainer. Listen, if you've ever felt just completely crushed by the modern daily grind, waking up every single morning just to punch a clock and survive another day, well, you are definitely not alone. Today, we're going to dive into a fascinating ancient text to unpack this massive tension between feeling totally weighed down by our daily labor and discovering how we can actually reframe our work as a truly sacred calling. So let's jump right into it. I want you to take a second and really reflect on your own workplace stress. Is your daily work just this heavy, exhausting burden you're carrying around, or is it a sacred sacrifice? Now, to answer this, we're going to look at the ancient text of Genesis chapter 4. And, often people just view this as a really tragic historical story about the first murder. But if we look a little closer at the source material, it actually serves as this profound, step-by-step guide to completely renewing how we view our labor, our professional ambition, and honestly, how we handle stress. Let's start with section 1, Two Paths of Labor, Cain and Abel's Contrasting Attitudes. Right at the dawn of human history, we meet the first family, and this text immediately sets up a fundamental dichotomy between two entirely distinct paths of daily labor. On one hand, we have Cain. He's a farmer. Now, in the context of this early biblical narrative, farming represents working primarily for the belly. It's all about self-driven survival. On the other hand, we have Abel, and he's a shepherd. Now, remember, the text notes that humanity was likely still vegetarian at this point, so Abel wasn't actually raising sheep for food. He was shepherding to provide wool for clothing and, crucially, to provide a sacrifice. So his labor reflects this beautiful attitude of lifelong service and an obedient response to God, rather than just scrambling for basic survival. And this actually brings us to a fascinating little detail hidden right in the language of the text itself. The name Abel literally means breath or vanity. This is a pretty profound realization from his mother Eve. It represents the idea that a life, and specifically our daily labor, when it's separated from God's purpose, is ultimately empty. It's just a fleeting breath. And this definition really prompts a major shift in how we should think. We have to transition our mindset from just doing worldly work to actually transforming our work into a form of worship. So how does this mindset actually play out in real life? Why did God accept Abel's offering and reject Cain's? Well, Abel brings the firstborn of his flock and the fat. He brings the absolute best he has, and he's totally driven by faith and revelation. Cain, meanwhile, brings the fruits of the ground, but he's driven by human will and his own self-achieved results. The sources point out something really critical here. God looks at the person first and then the offering. God values the heart. He values that faith-driven obedience way, way more than just the output of sheer human effort. Which leads us to section 2, managing setbacks, navigating rejection and emotional stress. Let's pivot for a second to a reality we all know a little too well: professional failure. When Cain's offering is rejected, he is furious. The text says his face falls. And it brilliantly illustrates this massive internal battle we all face. Listen to this absolutely powerful quote from God to Cain. "If you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it." God is literally personifying sin here. He's portraying it like a wild animal just waiting to pounce. I mean, think about the anger, the bitter jealousy we feel when we get passed over for a promotion, or when a coworker gets the praise we really wanted. That destructive emotion is just waiting to take control. But the text makes it crystal clear. We have the responsibility to rule over it. Okay, so how do we actually do that? Well, the text gives us some incredibly practical advice for managing that emotional stress during workplace setbacks. First off, you've got to check your inner motivations. Are you working for your own glory, or are you working for a higher calling? Second, do not let professional jealousy fester. It honestly acts like a poison. Third, you have to actively rule over those destructive emotions before they end up ruling you. And finally, accept correction humbly, because when we do this, we maintain our reverence for God and we keep our professional lives anchored in faith rather than just our own fragile egos. Moving right along to section 3, the descent into toxicity, the anatomy of a godless culture. So what happens when we completely reject that humble correction? Well, Cain fails to rule over his anger, he murders his brother Abel, and then he famously deflects all responsibility by asking, "Am I my brother's keeper?" As a direct result, he is exiled to the land of Nod, and Nod literally translates to wandering. What happens next in that land of wandering is super fascinating. If we trace Cain's lineage, we see exactly how a godless pursuit of survival scales up over time. In the first generation, Cain's son Enoch builds a city. This represents humanity trying to create permanent security and self-reliance completely apart from God. By the time we hit the sixth generation, things just explode. Jabal invents nomadic wealth and livestock management. His brother Jubal creates the arts and music, which the sources actually note was a way for humanity to entertain themselves and try to escape the deep sorrow of a life without God. And then Tubal-Cain forges weapons of bronze and iron, basically ushering in the era of war and cutthroat competition. So we see this highly developed, technologically advanced society that is simultaneously becoming incredibly toxic. And that brings us to this staggering number, 77. This represents Lamech, a descendant of Cain. Lamech actually creates this poem where he arrogantly boasts that if Cain is avenged sevenfold, then he will be avenged 77-fold for anyone who even scratches him. I mean, this is the absolute peak of a toxic workplace culture. It's basically the ancient equivalent of completely abandoning all ethics for personal power, hyper-competitiveness, and absolutely ruthless retaliation. It really shows us a profound truth. Technological progress does not equal moral progress, not even close. Finally, we reach Section 4, Work as Lifelong Worship, Finding Peace in the Grind. So how do we actually escape Lamech's toxic culture? How do we transform our daily labor back into a sacred practice, much like Abel's pastoral care? Listen to this core takeaway from the sources. Believers shouldn't just work to feed themselves, but make serving God the ultimate goal of their labor. Redefining our work paradigm like this changes absolutely everything. It literally takes that heavy, draining, secular burden of just working for a paycheck, and it transforms it into a joyful, lifelong response to our Creator. Let's break this down into some real, actionable steps for your own career today. First, make a conscious effort to view your daily tasks as a spiritual response. It's an offering. Second, maintain really strict ethical boundaries over that ruthless Lamech-style competition. Third, actively support your colleagues. Never adopt Cain's toxic attitude of asking, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Yes, you absolutely are. And finally, look, when you inevitably hit a wall, rely on God's grace during burnout, rather than just white-knuckling it with your own sheer willpower. The text ends with this incredibly beautiful counter-narrative to Cain's toxic line. Adam and Eve have another son, Seth, who basically replaces Abel. And Seth has a son named Enosh. Now, the name Enosh means mortal or fragile man. The text tells us that it was during the time of Enosh that people began to call upon the name of the Lord. This is the perfect contrast to Lamech's arrogant self-reliance. True strength in our work, and really in our life, comes from a healthy recognition of our own limits, our fragility, and our total reliance on God's strength. So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to anchor everything we've talked about today. Right in the middle of the chaos of your career, whose lineage of work are you really building? Are you constructing Cain's city of self-reliance, stress, and ruthless competition? Or are you building Seth's altar of reliance, transforming your daily grind into a truly sacred calling? Because honestly, the choice of how you view your work tomorrow morning is entirely up to you. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this gives you a completely fresh perspective on your daily labor.